Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is UNITAR. I am Kumamoto, Mihoko Kumamoto, the Director and the Division for the Prosperity Director, Hiroshima Office, UNITAR. I am an MC here today. This is the topic of the 2023 Outlook on Nuclear Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. We have 90 minutes to share information and also a bit of a time for Q&As. First on the UNITAR, in Chugoku, Shikoku area in Japan, this is the only body of the United Nations. Back in 2003, this office opened, so we mark the 20th anniversary this year. Our mission is human development for peace. The developing countries' people, mainly grown-ups, adults, for them we offer a lot of training courses. And Hiroshima Prefecture, Hiroshima City, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are supporting us in our operation. Thank you very much for your wonderful support. Many programs are offered, and one of the pillars is nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. In 2015, this program started, so this is the 8th year. For a course of 1 week, the programs are offered. Before the pandemic, the representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Defense were invited to Hiroshima from outside the countries so that they can have the face-to-face training to learn the negotiation skills. But during the pandemic, we're not able to invite them in person, but still we continued online courses. And finally, this year, we are able to invite them in person once again, which is great. So the trainees, can you stand up now? From 10 countries in Asia, 18 people are taking these courses. This course on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation are supported by Hiroshima Prefecture and the city of Hiroshima. As a part of this training program, we have this public seminar on by inviting the representatives from an expert on this subject matters and also the civil activists to discuss the outlook for the year 2023. We spent 90 minutes to have this discussion and presentation. We are inviting 3 wonderful panelists with very different backgrounds. So let me introduce them. From my left-hand side, Mr. Tariq Rauf. He is a resource person for our program. From 2015, he has been deeply engaged on this. I think you can refer to your leaflet. A former head of verification at IAEA. Now he participates and involved offering advice as the experts of this field. So he is one of the worldly renowned top expert in this field. Thank you very much. Next to him is Mr. Michael Karimian. Michael is at Microsoft. I think everybody knows the company. He is a director, digital diplomacy, Asia and the Pacific. he is now in Singapore. And Michael is going to talk about cybersecurity and also the threat of nuclear weapons. And thank you very much, Michael. And then on your right-hand side, Ms. Tomoko Watanabe. She is at ANT Hiroshima. She is an executive director at ANT Hiroshima, and also she is a co-founder of Green Legacy Initiative. This is an organization that UNITAR is also deeply engaged in. She is a co-founder of that organization. Mr. Watanabe, last year, she got the Tanimoto Kiyoshi Peace Award, which is an award for individuals who are contributing to peace creation. Tomoko, thank you very much for coming today. Ms. Watanabe will explain what kind of activities are done by the civil society groups. Now, the audience is very variety with what they do. So I would like to introduce one particular person. I think if you live in Hiroshima, you know her, Keiko Ogura. She is she is a messenger about the Hibaku experience, and she does it in English. It is a Hiroshima Interpreters Peace HIP. This is a group, and she is a representative of that group. And the training at the UNITAR, she always comes to the training so that she can share her experience of Hibaku in English with the trainees. Thank you very much, Ogura-san. And also the young ambassadors of UNITAR and many other people who are engaged in UNITAR here today. Thank you for your time. Now we would like to start the session, and we have 3 parts. The part 1 is going to be presentations by 3 panelists for 10 minutes each. They are going to explain the current status of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation from their different point of views. And also the next part is a panel discussion. We will have 2 questions for this panel discussion. I would like to have your opinions for each. And the last part, this is a Q&A. So this opens up the floor to everybody. Feel free to ask any questions. Thank you. Now, without further ado, we would like to move on to part 1. First, Mr. Tariq Rauf. What are going on about the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, the global perspective. So please use 10 minutes to talk. Thank you.
Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mihoko. First of all, I would like to thank UNITAR, Mihoko, Junko, and her wonderful team for inviting me and my colleagues to come and attend this year's session of the disarmament training arranged by UNITAR with the support of the prefecture, the city, and the people of Hiroshima. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, the international situation regarding nuclear arms control and disarmament is a little bit like the weather outside. It is cloudy and threatening to be stormy, with dark clouds on the horizon. I will talk very briefly about 8 or 9 tendencies that I see with regard to the deteriorating international security situation. So first one is that the international system that was created at the end of the Second World War, based on the United Nations Charter and the United Nations Organization, has become and is increasingly becoming dysfunctional. The existing international organizations and forums for discussing nuclear arms reductions, confidence building measures, are fraying. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan once said that the United Nations disarmament machinery is beginning to rust. And unfortunately, since he made that comment more than 10 years ago, the rust has grown and we have not succeeded in beating it back. One of the reasons for that is the return of great power rivalry. We are entering a new multipolar system with new areas of conflict and tension. Once again, conflict and tension has arisen between the United States and the Russian Federation, and also now between the United States and China. So there is this famous book written by a Harvard professor, Graham Allison, who talks about the Thucydides trap. This refers to how an established or status quo power, such as the United States, will prevent the rise of a rising power, in this case, China. So we see the difference. Under the Obama administration, the United States seemed to be holding a position where they were allowing, so to speak, China to rise to be what they call a peer competitor. But under the Trump administration and now under the Biden administration, the US policy is to prevent that, is to cooperate with China in certain areas, such as in the environment, compete with China in areas of technology, and confront China when it comes to issues like Taiwan and maritime boundary issues in the South Pacific. The second is the rise of nationalism and tribalism. We already saw that in vaccine nationalism at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, where many developed countries hoarded millions of doses of COVID vaccine, and in several cases, including in my country, Canada, several million doses of COVID had to be thrown away in the garbage because they had expired. Instead of donating them to countries in Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, where vaccine availability was quite limited. This is also now true because we now have a reversal of globalization and interdependence. And this is now caught up with military rivalry, and we now have an ongoing proxy war in Europe, started by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and it very quickly has deteriorated into a war, a proxy war between NATO on the one side and Russia on the other side. And this, in turn, has raised the stakes in temperature with regard to doctrines on the use of nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons policies of both the United States and the Russian Federation call for the use of nuclear weapons. In the case of Russia, the Russian military doctrine states that were the survival of the state to be threatened, Russia would or could use nuclear weapons. In the case of the United States Nuclear Posture Review, their policy states that the United States could use nuclear weapons in response to cyber attacks, attacks of chemical or biological weapons, or to restore strategic stability. Some of the Cold War's achievements with regard to nuclear arms control are also now being reversed. So at the moment, we only have one nuclear arms control treaty standing between Washington and Moscow. This is the New START treaty that is set to expire on the 5th of February, 2026. And thus far, there are no negotiations of a follow-on treaty. There were some glimmers of hope, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February last year put an end to that. So we seem to be stumbling into a new nuclear arms race. Reports suggest that China is also expanding its nuclear weapons arsenal and building somewhere around 400 new intercontinental ballistic missile silos. It is not clear whether each one of the 400 ballistic missile silos will be equipped with an intercontinental ballistic missile, or they will equip some of them and then move the missiles around so that their adversary doesn't know which silos may have missiles installed in them. Then we have the emergence of what we call destabilizing technologies. These include artificial intelligence, cyber technology, hypersonic delivery systems, nuclear-powered missiles, anti-satellite weapons, and new concepts of hybrid and fifth-generation warfare, which involves both net-centric military operations, but also net-centric non-military operations targeting the economy, targeting societies. So we are again entering a new complex international system and new warfighting domains. There are also regional challenges. In this region, we have the unconstrained nuclear and missile program in North Korea. As I will state later on in response to one of the questions that Mihoko will put up, my view is that we have had a quarter of a century of failed policies towards North Korea. Iran's nuclear program, which was constrained under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was abandoned by the Trump administration, now has been ramped up and is several times more than was anticipated. And then finally, we have the region of the Middle East, where we have one country with nuclear weapons, Israel, and prospects for having a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East seems out of reach. And finally, one treaty that is of great importance, particularly to Japan, a country over which nuclear weapons have been used twice, is the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This was opened for signature in September of 1996, and it has still not yet entered into force because India, Pakistan, and North Korea have not even signed the treaty. China, Egypt, Iran, Israel, and the United States have signed the treaty but not ratified it. And unfortunately, the United States is the only country that rejected ratification in the fall of 1999. So to conclude, very unfortunately, we are facing important new challenges, and therefore I commend UNITAR for continuing with its training for our colleagues from ASEAN and other Asian countries to better equip them to deal with these new international challenges for global security. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Mr. Michael Kalimian is going to talk about the next one. Now, hybrid war was referred to by Mr. Ralph, digitization of the warfare. Now, from Michael's perspective, digital technology, and also how are they relevant in the threat of nuclear weapons and nuclear war? That will be the topic. Now, Michael, thank you.
Kumamoto-san, go shokai.
Thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity today. From here, I switch into English.
To UNITAR for organizing today's session, Junko in particular, thank you very, very much. I think it's fair to say that we gathered to discuss a number of very pressing issues surrounding nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation and the global trends on technologies. As we sit here, the world faces a far more challenging and complicated situation than ever before, with the nature of war changing due to advanced and emerging technologies, just as Tariq was saying. It is essential that we address these challenges head-on and come up with solutions to promote peace and stability in cyberspace. Today, I will discuss nation-state threats to cyberspace, the emergence of hybrid war, the cybersecurity of nuclear technologies, and the solutions we can implement to safeguard peace and stability in cyberspace. In Ukraine and in other areas of the globe, we are increasingly seeing nation-states use cyber weapons to deny, disrupt, degrade, or destroy targeted devices, systems, or networks. In some instances, these attacks stand alone. In other cases, they have been deployed as a tactic in a long-standing hostility between nations, or strategically alongside the use of conventional weapons in hybrid war. These new developments should worry governments, civil society, industry, and individuals worldwide. I work on Microsoft's engagement in multi-stakeholder diplomacy to advance trust and stability in cyberspace. We work with governments, private sector actors, and civil society to advocate for and implement policies aimed at achieving a more secure cyberspace. My team works alongside colleagues who advocate cybersecurity policy and norms, as well as colleagues who generate threat intelligence and analysis, disrupt nation-state cyber attacks, uncover and report on foreign influence operations targeting democratic governments globally, and who combat cybercrime. Now, Microsoft serves billions of customers worldwide, and so we are able to analyze anonymized data, which is generated by a broad range of organizations and consumers who use our technologies. The anonymized data which Microsoft collects gives us a unique vantage point to analyze a global breadth and depth of signals intelligence. And from that, we are able to develop defensive capabilities to protect customers and the digital ecosystem. Between July 2021 and June 2022, the volume and diversity of security signals processed by Microsoft included 43 trillion signals synthesized every single day. And we are able to use sophisticated data analytics and AI algorithms to understand and protect against digital threats and criminal cyber activity. Over 8,500 engineers, researchers, data scientists, and cybersecurity experts in Microsoft operated across 77 countries. And from our vantage point, we can see that China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia are the countries of origin for the most observed threat actors targeting networks worldwide. Customers and users are increasingly implementing new security protections to defend against these sophisticated threats. However, just as defenses evolve, the threats are evolving also. Nation-state and state-affiliated actors are adapting in response to improved defenses, and these offensive cyber operations are among the most sophisticated and persistent threats faced by internet and technology users worldwide. Historically, we have seen cyber weapons being used by states to engage in espionage or theft of intellectual property. Increasingly, though, we are also seeing nation-states simultaneously engaging in kinetic destructive attacks alongside destructive cyber attacks. Just as the people of Hiroshima were the first to witness the devastating power of nuclear conflict, the people of Ukraine are now the first to face the insidious threat of cyber conflict, which threatens to destabilize our world in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. Russia is combining cyber attacks and influence operations with its military operations in its war in Ukraine. Even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine was already subject to more cyber attacks each year than any other country in the world except the United States. Progressively, we saw cyber threats moving from commercial customers to the government and the systems of organizations who work closely with the Ukrainian government. We saw nation-state cyber operations use a number of tactics, techniques, and procedures, including spear phishing, exploitation of IT services supply chains, and exploitation of public-facing applications. Now, Microsoft notified each of the impacted organizations we identified, and we partnered with other cybersecurity providers to share our insights and notify appropriate government agencies when required. After the war began in February 2022, initially with a round of cyber attacks hours before the physical invasion of Ukraine, we observed actors associated with the Russian military and intelligence launch multiple waves of destructive cyber attacks, destructive efforts that have continued throughout the war. Targets have included government agencies, energy systems, telecommunication systems, media, the IT sector, finance sector, and other critical infrastructure, many of which were targets of both physical and cyber attacks. These threat actors intended to destroy data or to impede the work of Ukrainian government agencies in the initial stages of the conflict. They have since sought to derail the transport of humanitarian and military assistance to Ukraine, disrupt public access to critical services and media, and steal information with longer-term economic and intelligence value for the occupying forces. In addition to destructive cyber attacks and cyber espionage efforts, threat actors are also increasingly conducting cyber influence operations around the world to support their efforts. State and state-affiliated actors use influence operations to shape opinion, discredit adversaries, incite fear, promote discord, and to distort reality. Russia's cyber influence operations target the Russian population with the goal of sustaining domestic support for the war effort, and they target the Ukrainian population with the goal of undermining the country's willingness and ability to withstand the Russian attacks. We estimate that Russian cyber influence operations have successfully increased the spread of Russian propaganda after the war began by 216% and by 82% in the United States. Unfortunately, as the war continues, these cyber influence operations will likely be used more and more, and in order to sustain public support and to fend off fatigue. The combination of kinetic attacks, cyber attacks, and cyber influence operations have also been used against nuclear targets in Ukraine. As early as the third week of the conflict in 2022, Russian military units captured nuclear power plants. At the same time, Russian military and state-run media pushed disinformation that Ukraine was working to create chemical and biological weapons, while cyber threat actors conducted cyber espionage operations to steal data from nuclear sector organizations that could assist these efforts. This was not the first cyber attack against nuclear systems. In 2010, cyber attacks hit the North Korean nuclear program. The South Korean Nuclear Safety and Security Commission was also targeted in 2017 by North Korea. Attacks against Ukraine's nuclear power grid was firstly seen in 2017, and multiple ransomware attacks have been conducted against Norway's nuclear energy systems since 2020. Details of these operations, including their origins, objectives, and outcomes, are not fully known since they involve highly classified information and covert activities, but we can say with confidence that cybersecurity and nuclear systems are closely connected in several ways. Information communications technologies are used throughout military nuclear systems, including in nuclear weapons command, control, and communication systems. Information communication technologies are also used throughout civilian nuclear systems, including in nuclear power generation, medical uses, food and agriculture uses, and space exploration. It is imperative that we acknowledge the growing threat of cyber attacks on our nuclear systems. These attacks have the potential to cause not only significant disruptions, but also loss of life. We must act decisively and swiftly to protect our global stability. Currently, 80% of cybersecurity incidents can be traced to just a few missing security practices that could be addressed through modern approaches. So, cyber attacks can often be mitigated by good yet basic cyber hygiene. However, while technology users and administrators have a responsibility to deploy basic cyber hygiene, nation-states in particular have a duty to uphold international law and norms in order to protect human rights from reckless state behavior online. The Ukraine conflict underscores that a new frontline exists, a frontline which is fundamentally different from other domains of conflict since it is borderless and largely created, owned, and operated by industry. That is deeply challenging, but governments, civil society, and industry can take action now to preserve peace and stability in cyberspace. For example, governments have already agreed at the United Nations that international law applies online. Since then, the government of Japan co-sponsored the so-called Oxford Process on international law protections in cyberspace. The Oxford Process convened world-leading international law experts who have opined on the application of international law principles to cyberspace. And this is essential to improving expectations, avoiding misunderstandings, and to building trust. Now, nation-states should very clearly say that sensitive areas, such as nuclear systems, should be off-limits from cyber attacks. Governments should also support the creation of a stand-in body to promote responsible state behavior in cyberspace, because a permanent UN mechanism to deal with cyberspace as a domain of conflict is our best hope for globally coordinated efforts. Governments should also follow the leadership of the government of Japan, which is a signatory of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. Signatories of the Paris Call are national governments, public agencies, civil society organizations, companies, and others who work around common 9 principles to promote security in cyberspace. As part of the Hiroshima for Global Peace Initiative, I strongly encourage the Hiroshima prefectural government and the city of Hiroshima government to become signatories of the Paris Call so that Hiroshima can bring its leadership to help secure peace and stability in cyberspace. Technology and telecommunications companies should also join the Cybersecurity Tech Accord. Hitachi, NEC, NTT, and Panasonic are already among the over 150 global technology companies who are partnering on cybersecurity tech accord initiatives that improve security, stability, and resilience in cyberspace. Finally, I encourage everyone to visit www.digitalpeacenow.org to join over 130,000 individuals from over 170 countries to demand that nation-states stop engaging in cyber attacks. The path ahead, of course, will not be easy, but as we have already seen throughout history, it is often in the face of the greatest challenges that humanity has made the greatest strides forward. So let us embrace the challenge of securing cyberspace with the courage and determination needed. Thank you very much.
Michael,
thank you so much. It is so true that we depend on the digitalized digitalization technology, and under circumstances, this digital technology is being promoted in the conflict, in the war. Now, next, I would like to invite Tomoko Watanabe, who is the director of Anti-Hiroshima, or sitting civil society. How that the sector has been active in the framework of the nuclear disarmament as well as non-proliferation. Would you please begin? Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Tomoko Watanabe, and I heard Mr. Tariq, I heard Michael-san, and Tariq-san mentioned that we share the same weather condition today as we think about the situation of a nuclear situation in the world. Hibakusha told me one time, Tomoko, on that day, 1945, I was able to see the blue sky. Did you believe that? On that very day of the A bombing, and that blue sky gave me the power to live, the power to go on. So I think we are in the same situation today, and overwhelming the violation with the nuclear weapons. We are going to be active with a small power as a citizen. We need to challenge. We need to face a challenge. I believe in that there is the blue sky always upon us, and not only today, but moving forward, we are going to have a strong steps moving forward. And today, Asian people received the training today, and I'm so happy to see all the faces to this time. And as I was listening to the two previous speakers, I was so motivated. And with your help of Michael, maybe the nuclear weapons can be gone altogether. That possibility I felt. And another thing I would like to share with you is we need to work harder. That's something that I felt to my heart. Yes, the Russian invasion to Ukraine happened, and an unimaginable global situation is in front of us. What could happen? There is a possibility of use of a nuclear weapon, but not only here in Japan, but many citizens of the world. I think there is some change going on in terms of a consciousness, and we start to see the great swell of public opposition and a change in the consciousness. I would like to look at that because citizens and citizens groups around the world are raising their voices, taking action to stop Russia from using nuclear weapons, not only Hiroshima, but in other parts of the world. By raising a voice, and actually that action has been continued, and with that we can stop Russia to use nuclear weapons. In other words, there is more and more the norm that the use of nuclear weapon is unacceptable. In Hiroshima last year, 1,000
1,300 candles were lit in front of the A-bombing dome. And no war, no nukes was called out. And especially young people and women led the series of citizens' rallies calling for no nuclear weapons and immediate ceasefire. This movement is not just of the case here in Hiroshima, but in any other parts of the world as well. So what we do here with the maybe small powers are connected to change the situation around the world. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Okinawa, or not only Japan, but the rest of the world. Especially the countries from Asia and from Africa, they execute such a great power in raising the voices. So thank you so much to you. And also, some of the activities in Japan have been sporadic. But now, in Japan, the Japan NGO Network for Nuclear Weapons Abolition was formed. This has loose-knit group of Japanese individuals and organizations connecting in the non-partisan, no-religious, generational, gender-neutral manner. The collaboration has begun. And the citizens' organizations now for the nuclear abolition and Hibakusha are engaged in a variety of activities calling for Japan to ratify the Nuclear Weapons Convention TPNW. Of course, the stance are different. Hibakusha Association, for example, to the Japanese government, we appeal to them to collect the signatures for the nuclear weapon abolition, and we ask the Japanese government to be observer in the conference of the parties to the TPNW. And for 3 consecutive years, on August 5th, we invited the representatives of the Japanese political parties and citizens, the group held the convention, and I've been the facilitator for that program. And the younger people in Hiroshima, Miho Tanaka, the lady, gave a sharp questions to the representatives of the political parties. Thus, the meeting was a great success. So it is so true that the younger people started to raise their voices. They have started their movement. But not only that, they've been actively have a negotiation with the Foreign Affairs, the ministry, and also they have a lobbying activities to the partisans. And also, there's activity is being conducted as a parliamentarian watch. Young people go and interview the parliament members various questions, and then the response from them will be announced on SNS, and they monitor their behaviors and activities. We have a Japan campaign caravan doing this work, and also Hibakusha, the A-bomb survivors. What actually happened on that day? They've been communicating to us directly. They are such a valuable people, but they are aged, and there are less opportunities for us to be able to hear from them directly. So the Hibakusha's experience and their feeling, how they can be passed on to the next generation, that has been a big challenge for us. So together with Hibakusha, or on behalf of Hibakusha, the initiatives are now being done to communicate this experience to the people in the world. And we are now developing and then training the people, namely law tellers or family law tellers, who can share the actual experience of Hibakusha to them. And also utilizing other medias with a different the languages the hibakusha's very, very valuable testimonies are being shared to the world. So various initiatives are now in place here in Hiroshima. And also 2015, we actually held the World Nuclear Victim Forum here in Hiroshima. And so from uranium mining up until the nuclear waste disposal, this is the processes. There's nuclear damages, and those victims of the nuclear damages are gathered from entire world. And this is a forum where everybody raised their voices, talking about their own experiences. So hibakusha got together, and they are now coming up with a face-to-face relationship supporting the nuclear victims. So there are so many already in Asia, and in the test places of nuclear weapons, there are many the victims. So it is very important to raise their voices. And there's another initiative, namely ICANN. There are 600 or more partner organizations in place around the world. They have been very active. And our organization is a part of ICANN, and there are 3 other organizations is a part of ICANN. The name is ICANN Japanese. There are many ICANN partners in Japan being very active for nuclear weapons abolition. And so the universalization of the CTBT have been promoted, and they've been very, very proactively working on the nuclear weapon abolition. And I understand the members from Africa, members from Asia, they have been so active. And then also there's an action to stop spending money for the nuclear weapon development. And so these are the activities that I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much when it comes to the nuclear weapon abolition. Thank you.
Tomoko-san. Thank you very much, Tomoko. There are a lot of efforts by civil society from Hiroshima, from Africa, from the rest of Asia. That is very inspiring and encouraging. Now from here, we would like to move to part 2. In part 2, we have panel discussion. So I'll ask 2 questions to all of the panelists. To each question, I would like to give 3 or so minutes for each panelist to answer to one question. So the first question, well, in the presentation part, I think already you have made some reference. So it is about Russian invasion in Ukraine. We would like to focus on that to dig deeper. What do you think about it from your perspective? First of all, Tarek, in your presentation, you mentioned the invasion in Ukraine. It has a global level impact on many fronts. So can you elaborate on that? And with that, what kind of problems are the negotiation facing? And is there any way to overcome this difficulty? Do you see some light at the end of the tunnel, or are we in complete darkness? Can you elaborate on that for 3 minutes or so?
Thank you, Mihoko. So as I indicated in my opening comments, and to sort of elaborate a little bit further, relations between the United States and Russia, as well as between the United States and China, and relations between NATO and Russia already were on a downward slide before the invasion of Ukraine. This actually started nearly 10 years ago. The invasion of Ukraine merely exacerbated the situation. The Ukraine situation has brought to the fore the war-fighting doctrines of both big nuclear powers. I already indicated that about the possibility of early use of nuclear weapons in both of their nuclear warfighting doctrines, even though some of the emphases are a little bit different. Now, the new START treaty that I alluded to will expire in 5 years, and we have no negotiations ongoing. A strategic stability dialogue was started after the meeting in Geneva in 2021 in June between Presidents Biden and Putin, but that strategic stability dialogue has been suspended. So today there are still more than 12,700 nuclear weapons located at 107 locations in 14 countries, 9 of them nuclear armed and 5 non-nuclear weapon countries. And we have nearly 1,500,000 kilograms of highly enriched uranium and 500,000 kilograms of weapon-usable plutonium. Recall that it only takes 25 kilograms of highly enriched uranium or 8 kilograms of plutonium to make a Hiroshima-type nuclear explosive device. So as Michael indicated quite well in his presentation, we have this new domain of cyber warfare. But the use of cyber technologies started several years ago. In some sense, the first large use of cyber technologies was in the invasion of Iraq in March 2003, where both electronic warfare, but as well as cyber technologies were used to disable Iraq's air defense systems, thereby enabling a crushing defeat to Iraq in that particular war. From my perspective, we have continuing irresponsible and dangerous use of cyber offensive technologies across several domains in many countries, not including but not limited to China, Iran, Israel, North Korea, Russia, and the United States, putting at risk critical civilian and military infrastructure. Now, the one only bright spot was the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in June of last year, which agreed on an action plan, and the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons Conference also in June. And I think for the citizens of Hiroshima, these are two bright spots, and as was pointed out by our third speaker today, I would encourage the citizens of Hiroshima to continue with their effort to build support for the TPNW, not only in Japan, but also globally. Thank you.
タリコさん、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Now, Michael.
と思います。マイケルさんもお話の中で、
So, Michael-san, you already mentioned regarding the Russia's invasion to Ukraine. So now talking about the cyber attack or cyber security perspective, so would you give us some more detailed explanation on what kind of challenge still there and maybe possible solutions? You talked about it, but maybe more in detail, please.
Of course, happy to do so. As many of you will know, last year at the Shangri-La Dialogue, Prime Minister Kishida commented that Ukraine of today could be East Asia of tomorrow, but of course we have to make sure that we take steps to prevent that. The one key point I really want to reaffirm about what is happening in Ukraine is this convergence between destructive kinetic attacks, destructive cyber attacks, and highly destabilizing, very worrying cyber influence operations. The convergence of those three methods or tactics, in this case by the Russian state against the people of Ukraine, unfortunately points to what the future of conflict might look like. And it is proven to be very effective in Ukraine, unfortunately. Hence the name that is often being used now, cyber war or hybrid war. Now, in some ways Tarek touched upon this, offensive cyber attacks against military targets are permitted under international humanitarian law, but offensive cyber attacks against civilian targets, including critical civilian infrastructure, is illegal under international humanitarian law. That is very clear, that is already very well established. But what is lacking is a way to hold states accountable when they break that norm, that law in international humanitarian law, and also how we can think about remedy for individuals who have been impacted and their human rights have been harmed. Importantly, if we look at the nuclear sector in Ukraine, if you look at the totality of Russia's cyber attacks, 3% of those have been directed at Ukraine's nuclear power systems. 3% on its own might seem like a low number, but of course, when you think about the broader digital ecosystem, or the entirety of internet-connected devices in Ukraine, the nuclear power grid will represent far less than 3%. So nuclear is overrepresented in the targets of Russia's offensive cyber operations in Ukraine. And again, that points quite worryingly to the future direction of conflict and the need for us to be very clear that nuclear systems should be out of bounds under international humanitarian law and broader international law and norms. In terms of solutions, there are processes underway at the United Nations, which Japan is very active in, including in the UN General Assembly under the so-called open-ended working group, which is looking at responsible state behavior in cyberspace. However, since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, that process has become very it's hard to have any sort of optimism about it because, of course, you have a great divide between the power of state relations, as Tariq mentioned so very, very eloquently. And so we should have quite limited expectations, unfortunately, as to what will come from that UN process. But broadly speaking, we do need a legally binding treaty which will hold states accountable and to prevent offensive cyber operations.
マイケルさん、ありがとうございます。じゃあ、今度
Thank you, Michael. And next asking Tomoko. So the civil society activists are, okay, what kind of impact do they feel after the Ukrainian invasion? Anything positive and negative? Do you know that doomsday clock? Now it's 90 seconds to midnight. It is a horrible thing. The world is at the brink of the devastation. So now the situation is dire, but there are citizens who are aware of that and those who are not aware of that. Actually, majority of us, the citizens, are not aware that the fact the doomsday clock is very close to midnight. So that is the message I have to spread, because we need to turn the risk into opportunity. Otherwise, we are not able to survive. If that's the case, first step is for us to be aware where we are. That is one of the responsibility for the civil society activists. So it's up to individual citizens. It is our own problem to protect ourselves, to protect our families, and to protect our loved ones. For that, we need to take action. We need to stand up and let our voice heard. That is a kind of mindset that I would like to encourage people to have, and I think it's possible. So the talk from Tariq and Michael, that have to be spread to individual citizens so that we can work together and connect it together. So we would like to work together with them. Well, in international law is necessary. In that frame, we are going to set up a new norm. That is the ultimate goal that we have to take action. Civil society needs the academic power. And also, like Microsoft, we need their engineers' know-how and the knowledge. I think they are rather like philosophers in the cyber world. So we need to work together, going hand in hand, to bring this kind of importance to the policy decision place so that the policy can change. Because we are working for our Earth, and we needed to pass this wonderful Earth to the next generation. And then we need political will to make a change. We needed to hand over people's power to make a change. And then we needed to bring, the citizens have to bring this voice to policymakers at the top of the government to make it happen. We need to deliver our voice to the United Nations. That's important.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So let us move on to the second question. This time, from the various perspectives, we checked the status quo, but we would like to take a look at the future or forward-looking perspectives. So what do we need to do? That will be the question having to do with the next step. So now we have this program here in Hiroshima. So the second question is, what is the role of Hiroshima? What can Hiroshima do? And by dispatching message, what is the expectation here? How we can engage people in the world in this endeavor? From that perspective, would you please share your views? Tariq-san, would you please?
Thank you, Mihoko. I'd like to first start with two brief comments. So as was mentioned, the doomsday clock, which is by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists indicating how close we are to annihilation by nuclear weapons and now also increasingly climate change, was moved from 100 seconds, which was from 2018 to 2022, to 90 seconds in January this year. But from my perspective, we are not at 90 seconds. We are at 75 seconds to the midnight of global annihilation, unfortunately. And Michael correctly mentioned distinction between civilian and military targets. But the march of technology is unrelenting, and it is now becoming very difficult to distinguish civilian from military targets, as are advanced conventional weapons and low-yield nuclear weapons. So that's a larger discussion, so I will move on from there. So in my opinion, the voices of Hiroshima emanating from the Hibakusha citizens, prefectural governor, city mayor, mayors for peace, and others serve as the conscience, not only for Japan, but also for the world, when it comes to remind about the horrors of nuclear war, and thereby the ever-increasing urgency to take bold steps to forever end the age of nuclear weapons, no later than 2045, which would mark the centenary of the invention and twice use of nuclear weapons. The Group of Seven, the G7, will be holding their summit here in Hiroshima in May this year. I have seen from media reports that Hiroshima Mayor Kazumi Matsui, along with Nagasaki Mayor Tomisha Taui, have urged Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, himself from Hiroshima, to have the G7 leaders visit the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum and also to visit Nagasaki, in addition to having an audience with the Hibakusha. Being a wise leader with foresight, I very much hope that Prime Minister Kishida can ensure the visit of the G7 leaders to the atomic bombing memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as to engage the G7 leaders with the Hibakusha, along with the grandchildren of Hibakusha, the third generation, which are the young people who will carry forward the torch, in order to give a better understanding to the G7 leaders that nuclear weapons cannot guarantee security, but only create existential risks for the world. This would be essential as the discourse on nuclear weapons and on nuclear deterrence has become sterile and devoid of any serious considerations of the humanitarian and environmental implications of nuclear armaments. In June 2022, at the Vienna Conference on the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons, I had the sad responsibility to moderate a panel on testimony from the survivors of nuclear war, the Hibakusha, and the victims of nuclear weapons testing in Kazakhstan, the Marshall Islands, and other locations. I wish that the leaders of the G7 and other nuclear-armed states could have been there so that these testimonies could have injected even some small realization of the perils of the leaders' addiction to nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence, factors that embolden nuclear-armed states and their client states to flout not only international law, but also to militarily attack non-nuclear weapon states party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Thank you.
タルクさん、ありがとうございます。それでは今度はマイケルさんの方に。
Thank you. Next to Michael. This digital technology and cybersecurity from that perspective. Well, These are very new areas. But what do you expect for Hiroshima people? And from Hiroshima, what can they do in order to promote non-proliferation and disarmament?
Thank you, Mihoko-san. 3 ideas come to mind. As already mentioned, the government of Japan is a signatory to the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. The Paris Call is the largest multi-stakeholder community working to promote or secure peace and stability in cyberspace. There is certainly an opportunity for the Hiroshima prefectural and Hiroshima city governments to become signatories as well, so that they can bring their moral authority to that framework. Additionally, individuals, including everyone in this room, I would recommend to visit the digitalpeacenow.org website to sign the call for nation states to stop engaging in malicious cyber attacks. And as Tarek mentioned, the G7 will meet here in Hiroshima, I believe in precisely 90 days' time. There is an expectation that the G7 leaders communique will make a commitment with regards to ransomware, but they can go further than that, much further in fact. There is certainly an opportunity for the G7 to reaffirm its joint commitment to the application of international law and norms in cyberspace. They can also make new commitments with regards to international cooperation among themselves and other countries, and quite importantly, to build the capacity for low and middle income countries so that they are better able to protect their own cybersecurity. Of course, there can be the sense that low and middle income countries use a limited amount of digital technologies, but that's actually incorrect. And of course, as time goes on, we will see more and more digital transformation in low and middle income countries. And yet their capacity for cyber resilience is currently quite low, which makes them very vulnerable to a more the future, which is likely to be more unstable in cyberspace. So the G7 can also bring its expertise and resources and international cooperation to help in low and middle income countries better improve their cyber resiliency as well. And I would hope that the Hiroshima leaders' statement and communique makes commitments along those lines.
マイケルさん、ありがとうございます。
Michael, thank you so much. And then finally, Tomoko-san. So you are already here in Hiroshima, actively working. So what kind of voices you can raise from citizens of Hiroshima to the rest of the world, so that the people in the world can be engaged somehow for the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation? Would you please explore your thoughts? What is most important in Hiroshima is that to walk together with the Hibakusha and be motivated to do just the same as Hibakusha, the citizens who are willing to do this, and they are asked to raise even more the voices for the nuclear weapon abolition. They have done just so much, but actually there is so much barriers, including the language barriers. We need to overcome them. So we need to move for the activities with more languages, and there are a lot of medias available. You'll be able to voice out on an individual basis. That's important, but also as a team, as a group, it is more important. And also, we can depend on the media such as art, music, the powerful medias. So utilizing all these possible medias, we'll be able to communicate all what we want to convey to the many people as possible. Now, in humanitarian aspect of nuclear, the international standards is not up to the appropriate level. This is my conviction. In some ways, there is a misunderstanding. There's a standards spreading in the world in terms of nuclear damage. So that's a reality. Some cases, the nuclear damage is misconceptually imaged. So, for example, the cancer caused by the radioactive materials, there are some missing information. We need to give out the appropriate and accurate information. And for this, we have some school curriculum available with a leader, namely Nanao Kamada. And this gives out the program for the citizens to learn about all the aspects of having to do with their nuclear, the damages, humanitarian aspects are now being explored. And actually, online activities, this is so important, the tool, the mean that we can have to explore the more accurate information of a nuclear damage. Because this humanitarian aspect of nuclear damage is misunderstood often the case. We would like to correct it. But Hibakusha people, they have such a power. They are such a powerful entity. Keiko Ogura is today here with us. So, for example, together with Keiko, I would like to continue these activities together with the Hibakusha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomoko. Now let's move on to part 3, which is Q&As. We are happy to take questions from the audience today, so that the panelists are going to answer to your questions. It will be interactive. So please raise your hand if you have questions. And please identify yourself and then also affiliation, if it is okay for you. And in the interest of time, please be succinct when you ask questions. Now, any comments or questions? If you do, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Now, the UNITAR members, well, wait for the microphone. Let's start from back of the room.
I have question. Sorry. My name is Shogo Nakamura. I'm UN Global Youth Ambassador. I have a question for Mr. Tariq Ulaf. I would like to tell me how nuclear power can be used for peaceful purpose all over the world. Specifically, I would like to tell us what we citizens can do so that money will not be used for nuclear weapons and will be used for development in developing countries.
Let's see. Yeah, so 今から数個
Okay, then we would like to take 2 questions at a time and then have the panelists answer to them. So one more question. Who was raising his hand? Okay, so to you too as well. Thank you very much. This is a question to all of you. Now we mark the first anniversary since the start of Ukrainian invasion. To end this war, what is necessary? Or to have a ceasefire, what is necessary? I'm Itonaga, living in Hiroshima. Thank you. And the third question, go ahead. Ai-san, please bring the microphone to her or him. Thank you very much. Sugimoto Chiemi from ELSE. The doom's clock, I think it's 5 seconds to midnight. Well, war is a criminal act, in my opinion. War between countries, why are they accepted and tolerated for countries to have war? That is because there are people out there who accept war as something acceptable. From that line of thought, I have been thinking, what is necessary to stop war? Now, the United Nations have to grow and to establish a global government. And then this criminal act of war, the justice have to be brought to them by establishing a massive scheme in the United Nations. And then the question is whether it is possible. In my opinion, I think it's possible. What do you think? Thank you very much. So the third question was about the reform of the United Nations. Now we have three questions. So the first question was directed at Tariq-san. So Tariq, do you have an answer to that question?
So thank you very much for that question. Today, there are 434 nuclear power plants working in 32 countries, generating 11% of the world's electricity using nuclear technology. Nuclear power plants are safe, provided they are operated according to the highest safety and security standards. It's now widely recognized that in order for the world to meet sustainable development goals as well as climate change goals, nuclear energy will continue to play an important role in helping us transition to clean energy or green energy, particularly alternative energies, solar, wind, and tidal power. So until we can perfect battery storage technology, we will need traditional energy technologies, unfortunately, coal and oil, and also nuclear, which is regarded as a clean technology. We do have the International Atomic Energy Agency and IAEA safeguards to ensure that civil nuclear activities are not diverted to make nuclear weapons. With regard to the Ukraine war, this really should have ended a year ago. Unfortunately, the international community and the United Nations has not been successful enough in pushing for the combatants to end the war, for Russia to cease its military operations and to withdraw from Ukraine's territory. What is not considered is that the large supply of weapons is contrary to the Arms Trade Treaty. It is also contrary to the UN principles for providing weapons to areas of conflict. On the other hand, Ukraine has the right under Article 51 of the UN Charter for self-defense. So we are in a very difficult situation and people are getting killed. And we have a lack of global leadership, unfortunately, not only on nuclear issues, but also with regard to cessation of hostilities. So I would urge the UN Secretary General to make a redoubled effort, both in Moscow in particular, as well as in Kiev, to try to bring about a cessation of hostilities. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。今、タリック
Thank you very much. In what Tariq mentioned, he already covered the answers for the three questions. Now, let's move to Michael.
マイケルさん、この
So Michael-san, the question number 3 and number 3, 2 and 3. One is Ukraine war. How can we have a state of a ceasefire? How could that be possible? And then also UN reform. That's the third question, especially digital technology. As an expert, if you have any thought, would you please share?
Gladly, thank you very much for the questions. In terms of the second question, there are two sides to the coin. Achieve in peace and sustain in peace. And what comes to mind in Ukraine is that the people of Ukraine, when the war ends, and it will end at some point, the people of Ukraine will have suffered enormously. Their human rights will have been massively degraded. But the lessons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan more broadly, as well as countries like Germany, show what recovery can be like. But of course, those were lessons from the 20th century. We need to think about lessons for the 21st century. So just as there was a Marshall Plan for the recovery of Germany in the 1940s and 50s, we can think about what might a digital equivalent look like. Because of course, online technologies are increasingly an essential gateway to the exercise of all human rights, including but not limited to education, the workplace, health, and more. And so when the people of Ukraine can enjoy peace at some point, hopefully in the near future, it's quite important that they have access to the skills to use and ability to maintain security for their digital technologies going forward, so that there's a greater spread of access and availability for all forms of digital technology to help build a more sustainable and secure, stable Ukrainian society in the face of possible pressures in the future too. In terms of the third question on possible reform at the United Nations, One thing that comes to mind is approximately 2 years ago, the Secretary General released a plan called Our Common Agenda. Within that, he made a call for a new agenda for peace, or NAP for short. The United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs is one of the leading UN agencies in that process. The new agenda for peace will specifically look at how can cyber and online technologies be used to maintain peace around the world, but also how to mitigate the risks that cyberspace increasingly poses. And so actually really the new agenda for peace is possibly in the short term our greatest hope for greater UN commitment towards maintaining peace and stability in cyberspace. And so, of course, the government of Japan, represented by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, should work with the processes that are currently underway to define and draft the new agenda for peace, which actually includes inputs from the private sector as well as civil society. So, of course, it would be important to see Japan's private sector and civil society to contribute to the new agenda for peace process.
マイケルさん、ありがとうございます。じゃあ、今度はともこさん。
Thank you very much, Michael-san. Next, Tomoko-san, what can be done in order to have a ceasefire in Ukraine? Are there any, individual activities, maybe citizens' activities? Are there any comment that you want to add? What I can do, maybe trivial, maybe small, but it is important to continue our activities no matter what. Because it's not a conflict, but a discourse. More important. And then the war should be stopped. That voice needs to be continuously raised. Especially the young people and the women. Their existence, very, very important. We will say, no more war, no more war. Everybody think that. But people do not say that. I think I would like to encourage every one of us to speak out and say no more war. I don't know how the people, Russia in Ukraine can say that. I don't know. But young people and then the women, they need to continuously raise their voice, saying that we do not want war. This is a high time for us to have peace. And it's very important for us to continue to say that. And it has to be disseminated in the world. So actually, one thing starts and then they could link to with the other people or things, and then they become disseminated. Sometimes peace is given up. I never given up when it comes to the peace. Never give up. If you don't want to give up, please raise your voice, say no more war. Now, when it comes to the United Nations, I'm not a member of United Nations. I don't know anything so in detail about the United Nations, but the United Nations have been playing such an important role with a strong passion. UN people are working, sacrificing their lives from time to time. But the NPT conference, the last one country saying no, everything is gone. I think this system itself should be changed. So for that matter, who is going to work on that situation in the UN? It is invisible from the standpoint of the citizens. So make it visible, make it transparent, and then we can collaborate in the initiatives of the United Nations reform. We can raise our voices for that. Unfortunately, there is such a huge distance in between UN and the citizens, and that's why citizens are not or cannot be cooperative.
最後について私は
Thank you very much. I'm from the United Nations, so let me add something to the last part of the comment. The reform of the United Nations, there have been a lot of discussion for over many years. There are some academic research on that subject matter. So people are watching it for many years. And even inside the United Nations, people say that it is necessary to do the reform. So they're aware of this, and the United Nations officers and employees, and also outside of the United Nations, would agree to this. Now, different countries get together to have a discussion. That is the place the United Nations offers. So we needed to keep that place at any cost. So the United Nations is not a perfect organization, but albeit we are doing whatever we can one at a time. And what are we going to incorporate the United Nations into coming problems? That is also the things the United Nations are looking at. Now, we have 8 minutes or so, so still we have time to get some of the questions. So if you do, please raise your hand. So, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, we will take those questions. Thank you very much. I'm Yasuda. I live in Hiroshima and I work at Hiroshima. This is a question to Tarek. The humanitarian aspect and also nuclear disarmament. There is a taboo of using nuclear weapons and also the deterrence power. These two are different aspects. And what do you think? Which is more important? Or what do you think about these two different ways of looking at nuclear weapons? The second question.
Thank you, everyone. It was really an extraordinary session, very sobering all week. We have been listening to very bad news and storms coming. I had two questions. The first one for Michael Karimian is, what about the convergence of powers like Microsoft really taking the lead, using the moral authority of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example, once a year, doing an open public training program here in Hiroshima and Nagasaki about cyber war and cyber education. I think these are the convergences we right now do not have. And the second related question is, when I was a student, my references about Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not the politicians. They were the philosophers. They were the scientists. I learned about Hiroshima and Nagasaki from André Malraux, where I was in a French-speaking world, but the French philosopher and culture minister, from Théodore Monod, the plant scientist and botanist, from Teilhard de Chardin, the philosopher and religious leader. Those voices are absent in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We need to bring them back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As Tariq mentioned, we don't have leadership in the political arena. We can complain about it, we can rally against it, but it's the reality. Politicians, mostly in our democratic systems, have been disempowered. So where is the moral authority? I have not seen a group of philosophers, religious leaders rallying in Hiroshima on 6 August, in Nagasaki on 9 August, because we need to raise again the conversation about humanities. What Tomoko was saying is no longer just a military discussion or a political discussion. This is a moral discussion, an ethical discussion, and those conversations have been missing, at least in the 20 years I have watched it. I think we have to seek these convergences. If you tell us how, we will pursue it at the civil society level. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I saw 2 hands in addition, so yes, both of them. Go ahead, one by one.
From Kyoto News. So thank you for guys. So I would like to ask you guys, all of them, so about the world without nuclear weapons. So not disarmament. So it is possible or impossible? So please the answer briefly, and then the reason. So not disarmament with a world without nuclear weapons.
ありがとうございます。じゃあ最後。
Thank you. Now the last question. I'm Tanabe. I work for the center. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. This is my comment, not a question. Disarmament and non-proliferation, what is necessary at the end of the day? This is a mid and long-term issue. It requires some paradigm shift. Nuclear, completely no use and no value. That kind of world, it is necessary. For that, technology companies have to be engaged in the technology has to be updated, and then the nuclear weapons should be completely out of date. In the process leading to that, the civil society's voice have to be collected and raised all the time. And then there should be some discussion in this public forum, and also at the political negotiation, like at the G7. The national leader should be exposed to this kind of discussion, and then we needed to have some consensus to buy time, for the lack of better word. We needed to both of them, but eventually we needed to have a paradigm shift with the technology advancement. In my opinion, personal opinion, this is how we can get there in mid to long term. So this is just my comment. So standing up and raising voices. Well, one generation from the one generation to next, we need to continue working on this. That is very important. Thank you very much. This was just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There seems to be 4 questions raised. So, nuclear disarmament and deterrence were mentioned. And the second question, maybe this is about the Michael's remarks. Microsoft company, maybe training can be done by your company in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. That was mentioned. And then, is it possible to have the world free of nuclear weapon? So for this, the points, you can just pick up the topic that you want to talk about. So why not, Michael-san, start your remarks, please.
Thank you, Nazarene, for inviting me back to Hiroshima. If it means I can eat more Hiroshima-style okonomiyaki and momoji manju, then I will gladly accept. But in truth, of course, it requires more than just Microsoft. Microsoft is just one company. I'm just one person. It needs a much greater multi-stakeholder effort across all sectors of society.
Thank you very much. Watanabe-san, Tomoko-san. Would you like to make a comment on various questions raised? Yes. Just like you, Michael-san, together. Michael-san, I would be very, very happy to do it together. And as was mentioned, the power of the philosophers, we would like to think that they are so powerful. There are the Roman Catholic Paulo came over to comments. This nuclear weapon is an issue of the entire humanity. This is about the entire world issue. But so when we are to look for the solution, the words coming from the religious leaders, from the philosophers are so important, because they are truly the people of wisdom. And then if they come together here in Hiroshima, for example, and discuss as to the direction of Hiroshima, we are looking forward to that. And not talking about the deterrence of the nuclear weapons. I mean, it's already destructed already. Just one person. With that, we only have 5 minutes to go. 5 seconds to go in terms of a doom's clock. And we would not like to think about the security measure in this kind of a situation. We should throw away these ideas. Because when it comes to the security, it is not just a matter of a military capabilities. I mean, we need to incorporate everything possible, such as human network, to work on it, and to have a commitment to protect the countries without having the nuclear weapons. I think nation leaders should have that commitment. And then for that, we need to have a proper knowledge. The knowledge is lacking among the military leader. That worries me very much. So that's why I use the word accurate knowledge. That's what I mean by that. So by so doing, working together, all of us, and with your the power, I would like to move forward, because I never give up when it comes to the peace. I never want to give up the peace. I never want to give up the world without a nuclear weapon for our new generations. Continue to work. Whether they would come or not, that doesn't matter. I'm committed to continue to work. Thank you, Tomoko-san.
Lastly, Tariq-san, on 2 points, deterrence and disarmament. How are they linked? And it is possible to realize the world without nuclear weapons. And also, probably you want to give about the paradigm shift, the comment about the paradigm shift as well.
Thank you. So in an earlier comment, Tomoko-san mentioned the distance between citizens and the UN. And it's actually a very incisive comment. Because the United Nations Charter starts with "we the peoples," but then the peoples disappear. There's no further mention of the peoples in the UN Charter. It's only states. So if one were to do a global poll of the world's people, a vast majority would opt to have a world which is nuclear weapon free. So when we come to democracies, and if we poll them there as well, generally there will be a majority for a nuclear weapons free world, but there the views of the citizens don't count, so to speak. It's also very instructive that Stanford University conducted a poll a couple of years ago, and 70% of those polled by Stanford University said that it was okay for the United States to use nuclear weapons again. So I mentioned this in terms of the question on the nuclear taboo. Unfortunately, there are increasing concerns that the taboo, which has been sustained for 77 years, against the further use of nuclear weapons may be weakening, and as I indicated in my earlier comments, in the nuclear warfighting doctrines of some of the nuclear weapon states, early use of nuclear weapons is very clearly posited. Nasreen, you very well captured the contribution of philosophers. You might recall that in the mid-50s there was the famous Russell-Einstein manifesto by the philosopher Bertrand Einstein and the scientist, the philosopher Bertrand Russell and the scientist Albert Einstein, where they posed the question, should mankind put an end to itself, or should they put an end to nuclear weapons first? And I think that's still our conundrum. And unfortunately, we do not have philosophers of that caliber today. And I would put that squarely, and Michael probably will not like this following comment. At the new technologies, there are 5 big companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. And for most people, you see everyone has their device on their table. Most people are walking on the streets looking at their devices. And I see that in diplomats and policymakers. If they can't find it on Google or it didn't happen 15 seconds ago, they are completely clueless. And I think, therefore, there is a responsibility on the part of the big tech giants, so to speak, to help promote public education. Now, of course, it would be difficult for them to take a political stance on any particular issue, but they could, I think, make further contributions to ease of technology to promote knowledge and spread of information across to more and more people. Finally, the critics of achieving a nuclear weapon-free world say that a world without nuclear weapons is not today's world minus nuclear weapons. So by saying this, they are creating a mountain that we will never be able to climb. Of course, a world without nuclear weapons will have bad actors and will have risks. You know, every day we take risks. We fly on a plane, planes crash. We travel on trains, trains crash. We drive cars, cars crash. Pedestrians get hit on pedestrian sidewalks. So those are risks as a society that we accept. So if we ever achieve a world without nuclear weapons, there of course will be risks of conflict and bad actors, and we will need to deal with them, but that need not be an obstacle to prevent us from achieving that particular goal. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I would like to close the Q&A session now. This was a 90 minutes forum, and we were able to hear a lot of different opinions. First of all, please join me in applauding to these three wonderful panelists. Thank you very much. Well, all these three wonderful panelists have different kinds of background, and they gave us a wonderful input from their capacity. And if, well, I am not able to summarize what was discussed today, but listening to today's presentation discussions, I have a couple of things that I would like to share. Again, at the beginning, Tariq said the current situation surrounding nuclear weapons is like today's weather, and maybe the storm is in our way. The situation is really dire, and I totally agreed with that. So that is where we are. And Tomoko talked about the doomsday clock, 90 seconds to midnight, but Tariq said, no, it's 75 seconds. So the world circumstances around us is not good. This is a reality. However, each one of us needs to explore what one can do. That is upon us. That is our role, which is critical. And there are many things mentioned, especially this year, 2023. There are a lot of major milestones, especially for Hiroshima. We have G7 summit meetings 90 days from today. So this can be a very big opportunity. And in a broader sense, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, we just passed to the half point. The target year is 2030. And so we are at midpoint, and in September in New York, there will be SDG summits hosted by the United Nations. This is another major milestone. So we need to utilize these opportunities. And like you said, there are a couple of advice, the importance of the leadership, leaders' responsibility, and also Michael said the international law and norms, they have to be better developed and prepared. And another important component is individual voice. Especially young people and women's voice need to be heard. So, like every possible problem, well, we need to take all society approach, not only the top of the government, not only the academia, not only individuals. All of them are necessary to overcome this problem. So we needed to increase the bonding and connection with other people. So this is not limited to national security or the security issue. This is also an environmental issue, humanitarian issue, and economy and society development issue. So it needs holistic approach. We needed to have more people and more organizations on our side. Again, thank you very much for staying us for 90 minutes. It's Saturday weekend, and thank you for your time. And please be safe. Thank you
so much.
皆さんありがとうございました。お帰りの際はヘッドセット通訳の機会に関しましてはテーブルの上
Please leave your simultaneous translation receiver on the table.
public event. When you leave this venue, please leave that headset on the desk. Thank you.